back, and we're back with a different series, I would say. The idea is that I will have someone, and that someone is named Jason Corder, who flew in from the States, and he will be talking about sound design, which is another, like something that a lot of people ask about. And I thought that for that kind of topic, one of the best thing is to ask someone that does this for a living, and also that I find personally really good at. And Jason has been doing sound design for quite a long time. Is in the what gaming, like video gaming,
Video game music and sound effects.
video game sound effect, and makes beautiful music as well. And the idea today would be to talk about how you work, and probably would give some insights for people that are new to sound design, that are not familiar or not really comfortable with the process of it, and see if there's a few things that they can learn from you, I guess.
Awesome.
So I would like to ask you a few questions to start with. One thing that we're going to do today is how to get started with sound design, but I would like to know, how did you get started with sound design? Like, where did you start it off?
Well, it pretty much just started, I could say as far back as when I was 13 and playing with different tracker apps, very old apps, and just pitching sounds that I recorded really at 8-bit down really far, and seeing what would happen with sounds at very low pitches and very high pitches looped. Just basically exploring what happens when you do this or that. And it went from there as I got better tools, the possibilities for pushing sounds and affecting them and processing them in really crazy ways just expanded. And as far as how I got into video games, that's kind of almost a stroke of luck, mixed with really hard work.
Mm.
But it's a huge place to explore, playing around with sounds and running them through effects, and a lot of fun and almost meditative in a way. So I think that's partly what made me want to do it just a little bit every day to get better, to the point now where I can do it professionally. And
Was there like one thing, like in the beginnings or maybe in the first few years, like either a technique or something that you learned by mistake, and you felt like, okay, this is what gets me hooked on making sound design? Was there like something that, or maybe a plugin or something?
well, definitely reverbs. Always current mood is reverb. So, I mean, that's like my favorite plugin, and you can do so much. But when I discovered convolution reverb, I think that was a huge step. And granular synthesis. Those are two of the most powerful tools I think any sound designer can use. But it's just besides the basics of pitching up and way down, and the reverse, which is just a classic sounding effect. But using everything all together really makes for some of the best sounds. I think one of the biggest tools I learned, wasn't necessarily a tool in the box. It was just the tool of having the patience to sit there and try new things. And, for days when I just didn't feel like composing a song, it was just fun to actually explore and play with new ideas.
Mm.
And I would just be thinking after a while of these ideas walking down the street, and I would write them down, or, now I put them in my phone and play around with them later. And some days it's a lot funner just to explore new ideas, and it's endless. There's an endless amount, which can be, I know, daunting for many at the beginning, but I think a good starting point is just try to throw a bunch of plugins in a row and rearrange them and start moving knobs and, become a ninja at automation and see what happens.
There's a thinking that, sometimes we run out of inspiration, and the thing that I talk about with people that I teach to is, you have to get back to the basics. And when you get back to the basics and you know your base, then after that, from there emerges a whole new set of things that you didn't even imagine. What would be like your base technique that you always come back to, that always provide inspiration?
Well, a lot of it is recording sounds, field recordings, either on my iPhone walking around because I, wasn't fortuitous enough to, or whatever, to bring my really nice mics out. Or if I'm just wanting to try and explore, in the box kind of stuff. I'll start with, white noise or sine tones. Some days I'll just get the idea of it just for the exercise sake. Like some people might want to, force themselves to go running every day. I'll force myself to do something like I spent a month every day just working only in the box and trying to work with white noises and playing with filters and granulations and just seeing how many sounds I could create from that, building a library, a bunch of exports, recordings and sounds, and I would make new sounds from those sounds, and it kind of grew like a tree out of that. The exercise part of it, I think, was really important, what I learned from that. So
Amazing. And sometimes one thing that strikes me as making music and production is that whenever you feel like you've learned everything, you just learn this one little thing that makes you realize that you don't know anything, and then it's like a whole new array of possibilities. And sometimes there's like this voice that I'm like, oh man, I wish someone told me that I would have had this opportunity of exploring before. Is there something you've learned in the last maybe year that you would have liked that someone tell you like many years before? Like, is this something, a new technique recently that you learned or discovered?
that's a good question.
Could be a plugin too, or maybe anything that is a tool.
Well, I think kind of stumbling upon the high frequencies that you can find in sounds recorded with a field recorder at 96 to 192. I just recently happened upon this, that most all mics, I have a Zoom H2N, which is not a great mic field recorder by any stretch, but setting it to 96 and recording some really crazy sounds, like a violin bow on some glass or something, I get all kinds of crazy sounds up in the high end that I can pitch that sample way down and use that to make like a drone in the background. Say if it's a video game and you're in a room with machines, those kinds of sounds pitched way down can make some amazing sounding ambient drones for those spaces. I had no idea. I wish somebody would have told me that a long time ago, because I thought you recorded at 44, you only get the hearing range. So I think just the constant learning and pushing yourself to learn and try new things, and that's kind of what made me stumble upon that concept on the internet. So being a sound designer is about learning how to learn and thinking of new things you want to learn every day, and making learning as fun as you can for yourself. I mean, learning how to be creative to make learning fun. It's not always easy in the beginning. We oftentimes just want to make a song that sounds amazing and great kind of right off the bat, but we need to learn also to spend a lot of time just kind of building up this huge library of tricks and ideas in our head. And a lot of it is talking to others or stumbling upon ideas on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
But if we ever stop learning, I think we've just stopped being an artist, or stop being human maybe in some ways. So I think we should just every day try to learn something new.
Is there a technique or an approach that you have in mind whenever you want to replicate the sound that you hear that you like? I mean, this is going to be like a double question, but like when you hear sounds, what are the attributes of that sound that in your head you're like, wow, this is a beautiful sound? And what is the approach of trying to replicate that sound?
Well, I'll analyze it, obviously, listen to it over, put it on loop. If it's a part of a song, I might just take that section of the song on loop, using a reference track. I know you've talked about this a bunch in some of your other videos. And so, I'll use the reference track and put it on loop. And is it a synthetic sound? If it's a synthetic sound, I feel like it's a lot easier to try to get something a lot closer to it. Oftentimes, if I'm using it in my own personal music, I won't want that sound to be exactly alike, because there's that fine line between plagiarism and making your own statement, and using source material as just a jumping off point, an inspiration, if you will. But I'll use different synths. I've oftentimes tried to just use sine waves to build up things, and using LFO modulations or filters. If it's a field recorded type of sound, there's not much you can do just straight in the box except go and look either on freesound.org for something similar, or just go record it yourself. And oftentimes I find in the process I end up with something much better, much more interesting.
Mm-hmm. And I think I think it would be a good timing now that you sit and work on things. And One of the topic that we're going to address today, before you just jump in, will be that focusing on the journey instead of the end result, to see whatever comes out of that. Okay, Jason, we're with the project now, and what I want is to see how you get started. Maybe you have like a base template, or maybe you have like usually some tools that you load up right away when you start working.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what I want right now, I would like, because a lot of people in the group on Facebook, we have this group of people that I coach and work with. And a lot of people have been asking about textures, you know. They have a pad that they make in Ableton, sometimes with operator, but it sounds really Ableton-ish, like really digital, really kind of too clear, too digital.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to know how to make it dirty or analog sounding. So what I would like to see is, maybe that would be a good starting point, which is, can you make some drones, some paddy drones, like dreamy stuff, and try to emulate an analog kind of feel?
Sure. Yeah. My base template basically is a blank slate with a limiter on the end. I honestly have to have that because sometimes my sounds get really loud, and it's nothing worse than blowing your ears or your speakers. So that's it.
Okay, so that's like
That's
not
a
more
perfect starting point. Yeah.
not more complicated than that.
No.
Okay.
Well, what I'll usually do is, I'll think of an idea like what you just proposed. Let's come up with a pad sound, and then I'll try to decide, well, do I want this to be synthetic or more organic? Obviously, it's nice to have a bit of both, I think. Combine all worlds, digital, analog. And
So maybe just a regular operator pad.
I'm going to start with analog.
Analog, okay.
As it has a bit of variance built into it.
Okay, cool.
Like you render out the same note twice, you're going to get slightly different results. Like they did build in some analog behaviors. And I think, the nature of analog and sort of that lo-fi sound is, warmth, a little bit of distortion, saturation, and grit. Well, let's pitch this up. So yeah, this is doesn't sound too interesting in the beginning, and I think that's how most songs start. Most sounds start really boring.
Yeah.
So I'm literally just going to record this chord and promise myself that it's going to end up sounding better. And that's one thing a trick you got to play is that, like, well, after playing with this for a few minutes or an hour, it depends on how long, it will end up sounding like you want it. Interesting, but it just takes a lot of tweaking and a lot of experimentation along the way, and that is kind of a core of sound design, is just the patience and time that it takes to make something how you want. And oftentimes you start with an idea and you don't end up anywhere near where you thought you would go. Let's turn the envelope on this down so we get more flat frequency activity. There we go. I'm gonna put, just to space it out, let's see, the delay effect. One thing I like to do to make a nice wide, I'll unlink the left and right, and I like to sort of do the Haas kind of effect, so you get a nice wide.
In maximum one sentence, the Haas effect is, just for people that don't know, it's kind of like playing with time to make things wider, right?
Yep, you have the left channel delayed slightly differently than the right channel, and the more you delay it, the wider. And you can also run into phasing issues in the bass using that effect, which if you're just putting it on a CD in the end or something, that's cool. Like, why not? It could be an interesting effect. Basically, one huge technique and tenet with sound design is automation and modulation. You just can't get anywhere without it. Your sounds are going to be really static and lifeless. You got to animate that. You got to breathe life into them. In this case, the first thing I'm going to experiment with is modulating the frequency. And one thing I really love to do is unlink my loops so that they just kind of run freeform on their own. This is just something that over the years brings me the most joy, and I also like to
You put that not on the grid, right?
I hold down, at least Mac, it's the command key. I think it's Alt on PC, and you can just drag the loop off the grid a little bit so that you get this non-conforming. Maybe we'll go really wide with this, like really.
I presume that you're not using LFOs for this because LFOs propose like a kind of like a constant modulation, and with a clip like this you can have sort of uneven and weirder.
You could put an LFO and modulate the frequency at the same time,
true.
and that would make
true.
an even more interesting result, something worth exploring and playing around with. I am going to group this instrument, and I'm going to map this frequency, and you'll see why here in a second. So right now I'm modulating the frequency knob itself, and you can kind of see it moving there. I'm also going to modulate the macro control that is mapped to the frequency, and you'll see here, I'm going to unlink it. You'll see here, it basically is going to double. It's going to do a sort of doubling of modulation. So 2 modulations stacked, basically. So if I go back to the frequency that's mapped, you'll see it's still affected also. So they both work in tandem. So you can, if they're both set to different lengths, you'll get a double, they'll both sort of cross each other in how they modulate. And so over time, you'll get some very unique and organic results.
Yeah.
So I'll make sure that's all the way up. And if you want to take it a step further, you can also add a clip automation. So you can do 3 ways total in Ableton. And sometimes that's useful if you really want to do some generative sounding stuff. You can have 3 layers of automation modulation combination, if you will. And things can get really weird, and one of the sort of difficult things is troubleshooting, and that I will spend a lot of time, oftentimes, trying to find some area to fix, basically. And that can be kind of tricky, so I have to remember where I've been, and sometimes I don't want to go too far out the deep end, or I'll just, make a duplicate of this instrument. If I want to like go back to it, I have this sort of, version of it. So along the way, you can make as many duplicates and variations as you want, to try to go far out there and then have a home base to go back to. So as far as like analog stuff, I mean, like the saturations are really.
You like the saturator of Ableton?
In some ways, yeah, I do. It can provide some very interesting results. I've found that the wave shaper section of it, and if you expand the plugin, you get all these other options. Sometimes it can get pretty outlandish, and that can be fun too if you really want to just like make some freaky alien noises. I mean, it sounds like you're really pushing the limit. I will say, just as a note, a lot of the plugins in Ableton are made to be played live, so they're run very leanly and efficiently, and you can have, I've had as many as 100 in one track before, turning them on and off at different points, but they don't sound necessarily amazing when you're running your project at 44 kilohertz. So if you export at 192, which is an option in Ableton, you actually get much more fine results with a lot of these. The saturator is one that you actually get better results of, and we can experiment with that at some point. So maybe I'll put the saturator here on this side of the delay, and I kind of like, as I click and drag this and just kind of jitter it a little bit, I kind of like this effect a little bit. So I'm gonna go into the modulation, and I'll unlink it, and I'll just make this some arbitrary length, and I'm gonna turn on the brush, and just try to emulate some of that jitter, holding down the command and like basically just paint it. You know, I feel like I'm doing a Pollock kind of a technique here, and give it a few valleys, kind of like a little chaotic.
Okay. Good job, man. It's amazing.